The sky above the moon was dark and full of moving clouds. Cold winds rushed across the empty land. The surface was covered with rocks and dust. It was a place where nothing lived and no one came. In the middle of this quiet moon, there was a deep crater. Inside it, smoke still rose from a broken escape pod. Metal pieces were scattered all around. Fire marks covered the sides of the pod, and one door was hanging loose. Next to the door, a small girl lay on the ground. Her skin was soft blue, and her arms were thin. Her dress was torn and dirty. Her hair was long and stuck to her face. She did not move much, only breathed slowly. Her name was Neri. Neri had not eaten for 2 days. Her lips were dry, and her eyes had lost their shine. She looked up at the sky, but she saw nothing that could help her. She was too weak to walk and too tired to cry anymore. She had come from a far planet. Her people were running away from war. Their ship was attacked by enemy fighters, and they had no choice but to leave the smaller escape pods behind. Neri's pod had been damaged. She fell alone on this empty moon. No one came back for her. At night, the wind became worse. It was sharp and cold. Neri hugged her knees and closed her eyes. She wished someone would find her, but only silence answered her. Then, the silence broke. A strange sound filled the air, a low humming noise. It grew louder and louder. Neri opened her eyes and turned her head. A dark shape was coming down from the sky. It was a large ship, black and wide. It moved like a shadow across the clouds. The ship landed near the crater. Dust flew everywhere. Neri coughed and tried to sit up. She looked at the ship with fear. She had heard stories of such ships, ships that came with fire and power, ships that belonged to humans, and this one was the worst kind of it was the warship of Bran, the most feared human warlord in this region. People said his heart was as cold as space, that he never left survivors, that he took what he wanted and destroyed the rest. The ship's door opened. Heavy boots touched the ground. Soldiers in black armor stepped out first. They looked around with sharp eyes. One of them saw the broken pod and pointed. Then Bran stepped out. Was tall and strong. His face was half covered with an old helmet. A long scar crossed his jaw. His armor was full of marks from past battles. He walked like someone who feared nothing. One soldier said, "It's just a crash site. Nothing useful here." Another added, "Might be a child over there, but she's not moving. Waste of time." Bran said nothing. He walked past them and into the crater. His boots made deep marks in the dust. He stopped near Nerish, looked up at him with wide eyes. She was too weak to speak, but her eyes were full of fear and pain. Bran looked down at her. He did not speak either. For a moment, there was only the sound of wind between them. Then, Bran reached into his belt. He pulled out a small food pack and dropped it on the ground near her. Without saying a word, he turned and walked back to his ship. Soldiers gave him strange looks, but followed. The ship door closed, and the engines started again. The warship rose into the sky and flew away. Neri stared at the food pack. Her hands were shaking. Slowly, she reached out and took it. It was warm and soft. She bit into it carefully. Her eyes filled with tears, not just from hunger, but from something else. Someone had seen her and left food behind for the first time in days. Neri felt a small light in her heart. Simeon had not turned away. The dark warship moved across space like a black shadow. Inside, heavy boots echoed on metal floors. Soldiers cleaned their weapons and checked their gear. No one spoke unless needed. This ship had a rule. Silence meant strength. Bran stood near the front window, watching the stars. His arms were crossed. His scarred face showed no feeling. Behind him, a soldier walked, and she was just a child. "Commander, are we really stopping for this?" Bran didn't answer. "She'll probably die anyway. No food, no shelter. No one survives." Long on that moon, Bran turned his head slightly. His eyes were sharp and cold. The soldier stopped talking and stepped back. Bran went to his private room. It was not large. A table, a map screen, a locker. On the wall, a cracked photo showed a younger Bran standing with 2 other men. The faces were marked out. Only Bran remained visible. Sat down slowly. His mind went back to the moon. He had seen many things in war-burned cities, fallen fighters, empty homes. But that girl's eyes stayed in his thoughts, not because of how weak she looked, but because she did not beg. She only stared. Bryn had seen that look before, long ago, in a different war, when he was still just a soldier, not a leader, back when he was the one left behind. He closed his eyes for a moment. The ship kept moving through space. Hours passed. Outside the window, the moon became smaller and smaller. But inside the ship, one figure grew larger at the rear door. A soldier shouted, "Commander, we have movement outside." Bran opened his eyes and walked to the screen. A camera showed the back of the ship. Through the dust, a small figure could be seen, walking, falling, then standing again. It was near her, feet dragged through the dirt. Her hands held the food pack tightly. She had followed the ship across the rocky land. "She's still alive," said a crewman in shock. Bran narrowed his eyes. "She must have followed our trail." The ship landed again. Bran stepped out first. His boots hit the ground with a deep sound. Soldiers stood around him, some raised weapons. But he lifted a hand to stop them. Neri stood in front of them, swaying from tiredness. Her eyes were red, her legs were shaking. But she didn't fall. Bran walked up to her. He looked down at the girl without speaking. She looked back without fear, and soldier said, "We can't take her. She's not one of us. She's an alien child." Another added, "She'll slow us down. She doesn't even speak human tongue." Bran stayed quiet. Then he turned and walked back to the ship. Neri didn't understand his words, but she understood his steps. She followed him inside the ship. The air was warmer. The walls were metal and gray. Lights blinked on the sides. Neri looked around carefully. Her hands touched the wall with wonder. Bran pointed to a small corner where gear was kept. He placed a soft blanket there and then turned away. Neri sat down slowly. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just sat quietly, holding the food pack. Closet at night, the crew sat around the mess table. Some were angry. "This is not a home for lost creatures. We are not running a rescue ship." Bran picked up his cup and drank in silence. No one argued with him directly. Later, Bran walked past the gear room. He stopped and looked. Incendiary was still awake. She had taken off her shoes. Her small feet were red from walking. She was wrapping her arms with the blanket. Next to her, the ship's dog, a small brown creature, sat quietly. Neri reached into the food pack and broke a piece for the dog. Bran watched for a moment. He didn't say anything. Then he walked away. In the early morning, alarms beeped. A storm was moving through space. The ship rocked slightly. Inside, the crew secured their stations. Neri woke up and looked around in fear. Bran stood near the control panel. He looked calm. One crewman asked, "What do we do with her during battle mode?" Bran gave a short answer. "She stays." The words were simple, but they carried weight. After the storm passed, the crew returned to normal work. Neri helped clean the floor without being told. She picked up a fallen tool and handed it back to a mechanic. She didn't know their language, but she understood work order. Bran walked past her again. She looked up at him. He looked back then. For the first time, Bran said a word directly to her. "Stay." That one word was an all. Neri smiled for the first time since her fall on the moon. The warship moved again through the cold dark of space. The engines were strong, and the sound of their hum filled every wall. Inside the ship, the crew worked with speed and focus. Orders were short, movements were sharp. But one small figure was not like the rest. Neri sat in the corner where Bran had told her to stay. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her eyes watched everything around her. The lights, the buttons, the people. She stayed quiet but listened carefully. Every time the door opened, her eyes followed. Every time boots passed, her ears caught the steps. She was learning without words, learning how these humans lived on day. She followed Bran into the hallway. She walked behind him at a distance. She did not speak or touch anything. She only walked when he walked and stopped when he stopped. The crew saw her and whispered among themselves, "Why is she walking after him like that? She doesn't even know him. She just eats our food and takes space. She's just a kid. She should not be here." Bran heard everything, but he never turned back. He walked forward, and Neri followed. That evening, When the crew gathered in the mess room, Neri entered. Quietly, she didn't sit at the table. She stood near the wall. One of the crew threw a food pack toward her. She caught it with both hands and bowed her head. She went back to her corner and sat down to eat. After a few bites, she broke the pack into 2 pieces. One half she placed on the floor. The brown dog came slowly and took it. Then it sat beside. Heron of the younger soldiers saw this and said, "She feeds the dog first." Bran walked past and glanced at her. He said nothing, but his steps slowed for a moment. The next day, Bran gave Neri a small task. He handed her a soft cloth and pointed toward a dusty metal box. "Clean," he said. Neri looked at him, then at the box. She took the cloth and began to clean with small, careful moves. Bran watched for a moment. She worked without asking anything. When she finished, she placed the cloth back near him and bowed her head again. Bran gave a slight nod. From that day on, she helped with small jobs, cleaning tools, carrying light items, organizing wires. She did not speak their language, but she understood purpose. The crew slowly stopped looking at her with cold eyes. One of them even gave her a small biscuit. One evening, another showed her how to open a tool drawer. Bran noticed everything, but he kept quiet. At night, Neri sat with the dog beside her. She drew lines with her finger on the metal floor, circles, stars, a ship, and then a small girl with big eyes. Night, Bran saw her drawing and stepped closer. She looked up at him, and then pointed at the drawing. She tapped on the star, then on the girl, then made a motion of falling down. Bran knelt down beside her. His eyes followed the picture. He understood she was telling her story. Neri then pointed at a group of small figures beside a ship. She tapped on the biggest one and drew a scar on its face. Bran stared at the figure. It was him. Neri looked at him and smiled a little. Then she added another figure next to his, a smaller one with long hair. She drew them standing side by side. Bran stood up slowly and walked away, but his eyes had changed just a little. Next morning, Bran gave her a blue jacket. It was soft and small. It had the symbol of his crew on the shoulder. Neri held it close. Her eyes shined. She put it on right away. The sleeves were long, but she folded them. It kept her warmer. That day, one of the crew gave her a small pad to draw on. She used it every evening. Sometimes she showed her pictures to Bran, sometimes to the doe. Days passed slowly, but something was changing. The crew stopped calling her the alien girl. They started calling her by her name. Bran said it once. When she brought him his tools, said, "Thank you, Neri." It was the first time he had spoken. Her Namesh smiled wide and nodded again and again. That night, when the ship rested in orbit near a quiet moon, Bran sat alone in the command chair. The stars outside were many, but his mind was not on the stars. Thought of the day he found her, small, alone. We know. She was still small, still quiet, but not weak. There was something in her that even some warriors did not have strength without. Shouting kindness, without asking courage, without weapons. Bran leaned back in his chair and looked at the screen, and it was a live feed of the hallway. Neri was walking toward the gear room. The dog following her steps. She had cleaned 3 boxes today, fixed a loose panel, and even handed out tools to the crew during work. She had not spoken much, but she had said everything, and Bran understood her more than she knew. The warship moved slowly through a quiet part of space. Stars shone outside the windows like tiny lamps in a sea of black. Inside the ship, the air was calm. Tools were back in place. Engines were running smooth. For once, there was peace. Neri sat alone near the back wall of the ship. Her drawing pad was on her lap. She moved her fingers slowly across the screen, drawing shapes, circles, stars, fire, and ships. But this time, her hand passed. Bran entered the room and saw her sitting there. He walked past her, then stopped. Something felt different. Turned around and saw her eyes. They were wet. Neri was crying it loud. Not wild. Her tears were quiet, like rain falling on glass. Her lips did not move, but her hands shook. Bran stood still. He had seen people cry before. Soldiers, prisoners, even enemies. But this was not the same. He walked to her and knelt down, slowly. He picked up her drawing pad and looked at it on the screen. There was a large ship, her people's ship, round. It were smaller pods, One pod had fire coming from it. That one was Nerish had drawn her family. A mother, a father, a brother. She had drawn them running to the pods. But her own figure was left behind. Bran understood the message Jesh had been left on purpose. He looked at her again. Neri wiped her face and tried to smile. But the smile did not stay. She pointed at the drawing of the ship and shook her head slowly. Then she tapped her own chest. Bran placed the pad down beside her. He didn't speak. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of cloth. He handed it to her. Neri took the cloth with both hands. She wiped her eyes and looked at him. Her eyes asked something without words. Why did they leave me? Why didn't they come back? What did I do wrong? Bran looked away. He didn't have answers. But he knew what it felt like. He walked to the control room without saying anything. The door closed behind him. Inside, he opened a small locker on the wall. Inside was an old data cube. He hadn't touched it in years. It held a video from long ago. Placed it on the console. A face appeared on the screen. A young man, standing in a war zone, speaking fast. Bran, we have to move. The command ship is full. We can't wait for you. Orders are clear. Bran paused the video and shut the cupboard. They had left him to later that day. Bran called one of the crew, a woman named Mara. She was kind but quiet. He handed her a small translator chip. Fix this for her, he said. Mara nodded. She walked to Neri and sat beside her. Neri looked up. Mara smiled and showed the chip. Will help you speak, she said softly. Neri watched carefully as Mara placed the chip on a small band. She fixed it gently near Neri's ear. The chip beeped once. Tried to speak. Mara said. Neri opened her mouth slowly. She tried one word. Name. Mara smiled wide. Yes, name. What is your name? Neri touched her chest. Neri. The crew nearby heard her speak for the first time. They turned and listened. Neri. Mara repeated. Good. Very good. Neri smiled. Her voice was small, but it worked later. She sat with Bran again. She pointed at him and asked name. Bran looked at her and replied, Bran. She nodded. Then she asked, why help? Bran looked away for a moment. His voice was low. Because I was left behind. To Neri tilted her head. She understood what. People from different worlds, both left behind, both still live. From that day, Neri spoke more. She learned small words each day. The crew helped her. Even the ones who first wanted her. Ganesh said tool when she handed out equipment. She said fire when she made tea in the ship's corner kitchen. She said thank you every time someone gave her food or help. Pony day, while cleaning storage, Neri found a small metal badge. It had a symbol on it, a wolf with stars behind it. The mark of Bran's crew. Showed it to Bran. Manchia Skedbran looked at her. Then he reached into his own jacket and pulled out a newer version of the same badge. He gave it to her. This one's yours. Neri held the badge like it was gold. She pinned it to her blue jacket. Now she felt part of something, no longer just a guest, no longer just a quiet child. She was one of them. That night, Bran sat in the control chair again. Stars moved across the window. The ship was quiet, but it was not cold. Heard soft steps behind him. Neri walked in and sat beside his chair. She didn't speak. She just looked out at the stars. Bran didn't move. But after a moment, he placed his hand on her shoulder for the first time in years. He did not feel like a monster. He felt like something else, maybe even a father. The warship moved near the edge of a red star system. Bran and his crew had stopped near a quiet asteroid field. The ship needed fuel, and the scanners showed no danger nearby. Inside the ship, everything was calm. Neri helped clean the supply room. Her hands worked fast, and her eyes stayed focused. She wore her blue jacket with the crew badge on her chest. She had become part of the team. Bran watched her from the command room. He said nothing, but there was a small change in his eyes, a little softer than before. Suddenly, an alarm beeped. Red light blinked above the main screen. One of the crew shouted, Commander, we have movement. 3 ships approaching fast. Unknown flags. Bran stood up at once. Bring up visual. The screen showed 3 dark ships moving quickly through the asteroid belt. Their shape was sharp. Their engines burned bright green. They were not friendly. Mara stepped forward and said, That's not a patrol group. They're hunting someone. Bran's eyes narrowed. Weapons ready. Shields up. The crew moved fast. Seats locked in place. Lights turned red. Neri stood frozen in the hallway. Watching everything, Bryn saw her. Neri, go to your corner and stay down, she nodded and ran back. She grabbed the dog and pulled it under the small bench where she kept her drawings outside. The enemy ships spread out. One of them sent a message. It came in a broken alien language. But the translator picked it up. You are protecting what is ours. Hand over the girl, or be destroyed. The crew looked at Bran. No one spoke. Bran stared at the screen. His voice was sharp. Weapons online. We don't hand over. Family. Mara nodded. Ready to fire on your word. The enemy ships charged first. Their guns lit up the dark space with blue fire. The warship shook from the first hit, but the shields held. Bran stood firm. Return fire. Hit the leader first. Cannons from the warship roared. Red bolts flew through the dark and struck the middle enemy ship. The explosion shook the field. One enemy engine went out. The ship began to spin. Neri felt the ship rock. She held the dog close and closed her eyes. But her heart was not afraid. She trusted Bran. More blasts came. The crew moved with skill. Bran gave orders quickly. Left side, move, target rear thrusters. Focus fire. The battle was fast and fierce. One of the enemy ships moved closer, aiming at the side door of Bran's ship. It opened its hatch and sent a small attack pod toward the hull there. Boarding, shouted Mara. Bran grabbed his weapon. Crew 3 to docking zone. Blocked the hatch. Neri stood up from her corner. She saw lights flash near the side of the ship. She knew someone had broken in. The dog growled. Neri whispered, stay. She moved toward the door slowly, her feet light on the floor in the hallway. An enemy fighter stepped in. He had dark armor and glowing eyes. He looked around and then spotted Neri, who raised his weapon. Neri looked at him, her hands empty. But she did not run. She picked up a small metal piece from the floor and threw it at him. It hit his helmet, and he shouted in anger, pointed the gun at her chest before he could fire. A loud blast filled the hallway. The man dropped to the floor. Bran stood behind him. Smoke rising from his gun rushed to Neri. Are you hurt? She shook her head. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes were strong. Bran looked at her, then said, you're not just brave, you're... While she smiled, the crew pushed the rest of the boarders out. The enemy ship started to pull back. One of them exploded as it tried to escape. The last one ran into an asteroid and vanished. And the warship stopped shaking. The lights turned white again. The battle was over. Bran walked back to the command room. His armor had burn marks. His gun was empty. Sat in his chair and gave one order: log the battle. We protected our own. Neri walked in slowly. The crew turned and looked at her. Some smiled. Others nodded. Mara came forward and placed a hand on Neri's shoulder. You did well later. Neri sat near the back room. The dog rested on her lap. She opened her drawing pad and drew a new picture this time. She drew fire in the sky, ships burning, one girl standing in the hallway and behind her. A man with a scar protecting her. Showed the picture to Bran. Looked at it for a long time. Then he pointed at the drawing of himself and said, monster. Neri shook her head. She pointed at him again and said, shield. Bran looked at her, and for the first time, he smiled, not just a small smile, a real one. After the battle, the warship moved slowly through empty space. The crew worked hard to repair the damage. The halls were filled with sounds of tools and quiet voices. But in the corner, a small figure stayed close to Bran. Neri did not leave him. She watched carefully as medics cleaned his wounds. Bran's armor had scratches and holes. His face was tired, but Stedish brought water in a small cup. Bran took it without a word. She sat next to him, holding the cup for a moment, then placed it down. Gently, crew watched the quiet moments. They had seen the fierce warlord in many battles. They had heard his harsh words and felt his power. But now, they saw him like a man who needed help. Pony of the soldiers whispered. She cares for him, another said. Maybe she is stronger than us. Days passed, and Bran's strength slowly returned. Neri stayed by his side. She never left the room. She brought clean clothes and fresh water. She sat quietly when he slept. Dog also stayed close, resting near the door. It was clear the small family was growing outside the medical room. The crew began to change how they looked at Neri. At first, many had doubted her. They thought she was a burden. But now, they saw her courage and kindness. She worked without complaint. She helped the injured and shared food with the dog and day. Mara came to Neri with a small box. Inside was a simple necklace with a small metal shield. It was a symbol of Bran's crew, given only to those who earned trust. Neri's eyes grew wide. She took the necklace carefully and put it around her neck. The shield felt heavy but important. She smiled softly and nodded to Mara. Bran noticed and said quietly, "You are family now." Neri's smile grew bigger. She looked at him with new hope as Bran recovered. He called the crew for a meeting. The room was filled with strong warriors and sharp minds. They listened closely as Bran spoke. "We have a new member," he said. "Not by blood, but by choice. Neri is part of this crew. She has earned her place." The room was silent. Some nodded. Others looked surprised. Bran's voice was calm but strong. "She fights in her own way. Her courage saved us in battle. Her heart keeps us together." After the meeting, some crew members came to Neri and shook her hand. Others gave her small gifts, food, tools, and warm blankets. She accepted all with a quiet grace. Neri no longer felt like an outsider. She belonged to her own evening. Bran sat with Neri near the ship's window. Stars shone bright, and the moon below was calm. Neri looked up at him. "Bran," she said softly. "Thank you." Bran smiled. "You have given me more than thanks. You have given me family." She reached out and took his hand. It was rough and strong. She held it tightly. "Together," she said, "we are strong." Bran nodded. Stronger than any warlord. Alone from that day, Neri trained with the crew. She learned how to use small weapons, how to repair machines, and how to lead when needed. Her small size made her quick and clever. She became known as the small one with the steel heart. The warship was no longer just a place for battle. It was a home, and in that home, the smallest and the fiercest stood side by side, ready for whatever the stars would bring next. The warship moved steadily through space. The stars outside were bright and many inside. The crew worked together, each one knowing their role. But there was something new on the ship now, something no one had expected. Neri walked through the halls with confidence. She wore her blue jacket with the crew badge on the shoulder. Her steps were light but sure. The crew no longer whispered or stared. Instead, they smiled and greeted her by name. Bran watched from the command room. His face was still marked with scars and lines from years of war. But when he looked at Neri, his eyes held a warmth that had not been there before. Other warlords in this part of space had heard the story of the small blue-skinned girl who was left to die on a cold moon. The story of how the feared warlord Bran had found her, fed her, and kept her alive. The story of how she had grown strong beside him. Some warlords laughed at first. They said, "A child, a weak alien. How can she be strong?" But when they saw her with Bran, the most feared man in space, they changed their minds. They saw the way she moved with purpose, the way she helped plan battles, the way she stood calm in the face of danger. They began to call her Daughter of Steel. One day, Bran held a meeting with his crew. Neri sat beside him. She wore a new badge, one that showed she was a leader in the crew. Her hands were steady. Her voice was soft but clear. Bran spoke to the group. "We have faced many enemies and dangers, but we have also built something strong. Family, trust, courage. Neri is a part of that. She is more than a survivor. She is a warrior." The crew cheered. Some clapped, others smiled wide. Neri looked at Bran and nodded. After the meeting, Neri went to the training room. She practiced with small weapons. She moved quickly, her small size a help, not a weakness. Bran watched and sometimes joined her. "Good," he said once. "You are fast and smart. You fight not just with weapons, but with your mind." Neri smiled. "Thank you, Bran." One night, Bran and Neri sat outside the ship on a quiet moon. Stars were shining brightly. The wind was soft. Neri looked at Bran. "Will they always fear you?" She is scared. Bran laughed softly. "Some will. Fear can be a tool, but respect is better." Neri nodded. "And do they respect me?" Bran looked at her, his eyes kind. "They already do. Because you stand with me. Because you are strong. Because you never give up." Neri smiled. "I was left to die, but I live, and now Ali, Bran placed a hand on her shoulder. "You are my daughter of steel, not by blood, but by heart." She looked up at him. "And you are my father of fire." They both laughed softly, a sound rare. In the coldness of space, the warship continued its journey. It was no longer just a place of war. It was a place of hope, of family, of new beginnings. Neri and Bran stood side by side, ready to face the future together, because sometimes even the smallest light can shine brightest among the stars.